This week we've been looking at dominant economic concepts during this time period. Starting today, we're going to also look at dominant governmental policies during this time period. The time period after exploration was a time period when most countries were ran by an unlimited monarch, or an absolute monarch, which is the term in your book. Now I want y'all to think about what those terms mean, unlimited and monarchs. Hopefully you remember that monarchs are kings and queens, and unlimited just means there's no limit to what they can do. So today we're going to talk about unlimited monarchies. An unlimited monarchy is a government where the king or the queen can do whatever they want. There is no limit to what they can do. No one's thoughts or opinions mattered, except for the thoughts of the king or the queen, the ruler, the ruling family. This easily leads to what Americans consider a tyranny. If you're automatically thinking that it sounds like a tyranny, it pretty much is. But some unlimited monarchs were very kind, and some unlimited monarchs were incredibly oppressive, which is what Americans generally think of when we think of tyrannies. Unlimited monarchs, frequently tyrants. So what did the regular people do in this type of culture, you may ask? Well, the regular people, the regular citizens, they had very few rights in an absolute monarchy. They had to be completely obedient to the rulers in an absolute monarchy. In 6th grade, you talk about the fact that the kings could have regular people put to death for very little offense. You talk about the fact that the kings could take people's houses and take people's property with very little reason. That all was still going on during this time period. In fact, citizens had very few support against the oppressive rulers. There was very little things that people could do to defend themselves against what we would consider today a tyrannical form of government. Right here I've got some pictures of a farmer, some pictures of other farmers. Most of the regular people were farmers during this time period with little rights and little freedom. In 6th grade, we talk about the mandate of heaven. If you've forgotten what the mandate of heaven is, basically it was a Chinese belief that the gods chose the king. And if you were fighting against the king, then in reality you were fighting against the gods, and nobody wanted to be said that they were fighting against the gods. In ancient Egypt, there was a similar idea that Horus, the hawk god, would actually descend upon the pharaoh and take over the pharaoh's body, and that if you fought against the pharaoh, you were fighting against the gods. Well, in Christian Europe during this time period, they came up with a very similar concept. The concept was called divine right. According to the divine right, kings were chosen by God from the Bible. And if you opposed the ruler of the country, then you were opposing God. And the people of Europe didn't want to do that. These people adamantly believed in God and felt that God ruled their lives. Right here we just have two political cartoons discussing divine right. I'll let you read them at your leisure. I get a kick out of it. My wife would punch me in the nose if I ever tried to claim I was in complete control for some specific reason. Some of you may understand that. The most famous example of an absolute monarch is France's Louis XIV. Now please note, he's Louis XIV because there were several other kings in the line that were named Louis. Louis XIV was an absolute monarch who ruled France absolutely. He had a giant palace built, one of the most beautiful palaces in the world, called Versailles. It's still there today, and you can go tour it. I've been there. It's got this awesome hall of mirrors that you can go down, and it's all these mirrors and these lights. Louis liked to call himself the Sun King because he thought he was like that important. He was the center of the universe. He also oftentimes said he was the state, which means basically he was France. And France was him. The other day we talked about fashion, and if you look at him, the fashion of this time period was very different from today. He's got the long black flowing wig, and he's wearing what we would call pantyhose today, and little ruby red slippers. Dorothy would be proud. Another famous example of an absolute monarch is Russia's Catherine the Great. Like many queens that you talk about in 6th grade, her husband had been king, and when he died, she took over. Her husband was murdered, and it's a rather unusual case. Maybe we'll talk about it one day. When she took over, though, she decided to set about making Russia one of the most powerful countries in the world, kind of like it was when y'all talk about in 5th grade. So she set out modernizing the country, modernizing the army, modernizing the travel, and really changed Russia a lot. She also began sentencing serfs to be imprisoned in a place called Siberia, which is one of the coldest places in the world. From what I understand, it's so cold that when you breathe, not only do you see the air come out like it does here when it's cold, but it actually freezes instantly and the water vapor drops to the ground as ice. And finally, we need to look at some powers the absolute monarchs all shared. Regardless of what country you're talking about, absolute monarchs could raise the taxes without asking anybody. In America today, if the president decides we need more money, yes, the United States government can raise taxes, but he has to go to Congress, and Congress has to vote to allow him to raise taxes. In an absolute monarchy, the king just raises taxes whenever he wants to. Absolute monarchs also were able to dissolve, which means to get rid of, the lawmaking groups. In America, we call this the legislative body or the Congress, but it would be like if our president could just fire Congress one day. And finally, absolute monarchs use the army to enforce their rules, which goes back to that whole tyranny thing that we talk about in 6th grade so much, and we'll talk about a lot this year. Absolute monarchs knew that the army supported them, and that was all that mattered.